Welcome to Constant Variables, a podcast where we take a non-technical look at building and growing digital products. I'm Michael Roth. Let's get nerdy.
This episode is sponsored by the Jed Mahonis Group, a full-stack mobile-first digital agency helping businesses transform the way they work. Our CEO, Rob Bentley, who you'll find on some episodes in the back catalog of Constant Variables, recently launched a newsletter to share short development tips from his decade of experience building mobile products. So if you're looking for some nerdy tech details to up your code game, you can find the link to his newsletter, which is called Mobile Developer Shorts, in the show notes of this episode. But for now, on to the show.
Hey Liz, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me here, Michael.
Yeah, I'm really excited to get to know a little bit more about your career. You have over 2 decades of technology leadership experience in the Minneapolis tech community through industries like social good and Internet of Things, as well as mobile apps and different video game libraries. Would you be able to give the audience a highlight reel or a little bit of insight how your career in tech has landed you where you're at, kind of focused around social good now?
Yeah. It's having it be over 2 decades and, just touching in all those industries that you mentioned, it can be a pretty lengthy story. I think I've gotten better about abbreviating it. But I'd love to share some key highlights that sort of set the stage of like who I am and the work that I do, because it all builds upon one another. So how my career in tech started before I had a career in tech. In the mid-90s, when I was in high school and I got online for the first time, I discovered the internets. So long story short, I've always been fascinated with computers. I was exposed to computers at a really young age, but when, the internet kind of like brought computers to like a whole new level for many, many people who were around during that period of time. And I was just like really just curious and fascinated, by the World Wide Web. And so I discovered a site called GeoCities. And they had a bunch of templates. So you were like, you could make your own web page or your own website. And I was like, this looks really simple. I'm going to like figure out what they did here. So I taught myself HTML and I wrote my first website in Notepad.
I mean, I was born in the late 90s and came up when the internet was obviously fairly well known by the time I was aware enough to be exploring it. And that much willingness to engage and learn, I feel like is still unique among people. And the fact that you were on the front of all that and were just like, yeah, I can learn this on my own. That's awesome.
Yeah. Well, and HTML was more like simplified in those days. Like they didn't have CSS. There was flavors of CSS that were in the HTML, but it was much more simplified and actually really, really easy to pick up if you had like the aptitude for that. And so when it came time to think about college, I was like, everyone was like, you should go into computer science. You should go into computer science. And I was like, no, because like, have you seen the people who are in computer science, like degrees and roles? Like, they don't look like me. They don't act like me. I don't belong there. And so I went to school to become an architect. I can't draw a straight line, so I dropped out. And they weren't doing CAD yet at the time. I think maybe this story would have ended up differently if CAD was like fully embraced by the architecture industry at that time.
Yeah, it would have kind of scratched both the computer tech itch while also getting that creative architect side of things.
Right, for sure.
Taking out the ability to draw a straight line being a necessity.
Right. And so While I was like figuring out what I was going to do, I was like, like, am I going to go back to school and try something different? Am I going to go get a job? Am I just going to figure things out? A friend of mine was like, hey, there's this company and they're hiring someone to build websites. You should just apply for the job. And I was like, yeah, okay. Yeah. Like that'd be great. Like I'll make some money and then I'll figure out what I'm going to do. That company is now Thomson Reuters, but at the time it was, West Group. And they had a department that had just recently formed where they had an online legal directory and they were building websites for law firms, in the early 2000s.
Okay.
So I started that in 2000. They actually probably started like a year or two before that. But anyways, they eventually, acquired an organization called FindLaw, and then eventually Thomson Reuters acquired West Group. But what was really cool about that experience, so I like a few months later, I got hired on full time. I loved it. I was like, oh my gosh, I should be doing this, right? Why did I not think this was the path for me? But what was really cool about especially like the early years there it was a publishing company that was now starting to dabble in tech. And so we almost felt like a startup. Like we had some funding, we were sort of seen as like innovators, but we didn't like necessarily fit into the rest of the like culture there. So like we were corporate, but it was like corporate startup.
Yeah, so you guys were kind of like a prototype branch where you're your own division trying to figure out your own things separate from the rest of the business plan.
Yeah. And then after a few years, we really started to grow pretty rapidly as an org. And so I stayed there for 13 years, but during my time there, I got to do a ton of different things. So like I started off doing what would be now front-end web development. But I also like did some design work. I did what would be now considered like a DevOps role where I was doing like web server setup and like email setup for our clients. Then I was like, when Google became a thing, I was like, hey, what's going over there? Like, what is this search engine optimization and analytics? And so I did that for a while. And I'm a very curious person. And so like, I just kept letting my curiosity lead me in that part of my career. So then I did account management and then it came back over on the like implementation operations side and managed teams that I had been a part of. And when I left there, I was managing a group of marketing copywriters. And I had a video game startup as well.
Got it. Nice. I see the startup trend kind of persistent through the career, and I'm sure wearing many, many hats is something you get used to in that like field, so to speak.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm definitely a person where like everyone will tell me like, well, what are some things that you like to do as hobbies? And I was like, I love new things. So like, I love meeting new people. I love going out and doing like new activities or going on new adventures or traveling to new places. And so that same theme is also in my career of like, I really love learning new things, or working on new projects or working with new companies, whether it's like at a new company or like partnering with other people. Like when I did my agency work, I got to work with so many different companies. And so it's that like hunger and like curiosity around the newness and just like wanting to learn that like is a thread both for my personal life, but also in my professional life.
Yeah, where that's kind of that variety's feeding your curiosity as opposed to overwhelming you that it might do to some people who need just kind of steady consistency from their work.
Right. Yeah. And the video game startup sort of started out like I was done with corporate. I was like, I learned so much, but I didn't want to climb that ladder in that environment. And one of my former employees, we were just chatting one day and she was like, I want to build a video game company for adult and make games for adult women. And
Okay.
I was like, yeah, I want to help you with that.
Yeah. Honestly, that's not something that seems focused out there.
Right. And we were doing some other stuff too. So like, this is the part of my career where, you know, as a woman in tech, and then it's still today, and like, there's been a lot of progress, but there's a lot of obstacles you have to face. Like, I have definitely been like the only female on a team. I've been the only person on like a project. I've been the only female in the room. And so like, this is the point in my career where I was like, wow, I need to find a way to create more space for people like me that don't feel included, that were that person. And like that person I was in high school where I was like, computer science, I don't belong there because no one like me is there.
Sure. Helping to be that role model that you were looking for, but didn't know you wanted.
Yeah, for sure. I also used to be a managing director for a conference in the Twin Cities called She's Geeky. It was for women and girls interested in STEM. And so I ran that for a couple of years. It's actually started in San Francisco, and then I attended like the DC version of that conference with the intention of bringing it to the Twin Cities. And then we also, my business partner and I spun up re-spun up Girls in Tech here locally as well. So like really, you know, trying to like create a space for more women in technology.
Actually taking action around your own community is always huge. And it feels like that's impossible to change, but just start going down that road. And I guess it seems like you found ways to make that happen.
Yeah, for sure. And there's themes like there's parts of my career where I was like, you know what, I really want to get kids engaged in technologies and tech careers. And then as we start to talk about my social good work, I wanted to eliminate any barriers in building tech for people from all backgrounds and abilities. And wanting people to just be considered and thought of. And that doesn't happen a lot in a lot of technology.
Well, and I think that kind of leads well into what your LinkedIn bio is focused around, which is well-intended software can be oppressive. I'm working to change that. And a lot of people might not know how software can be oppressive unless they've directly experienced. So what are some red flags you've seen in software or in kind of tech practices in general that get a little oppressive?
Yeah. So one of the things that I like to start with is something that people can really catch on to pretty quickly. I have a 3-year-old. I have 2 children, but I have a 3-year-old. And right now in preschool, she's really learning all the letters in her name. So her name is Artemis. And she'll point out like, oh, that A, that's my letter. Like, that's my letter. But like your name is one of the first things you learn how to write. It's like one of the first words that you're ever taught to write because it's a name that's really personal, right? And it's important to you. And one of the ways that people can get instantly sort of left out on a website is a contact us form or a form where you're asking for somebody's name. And so you can see this play out in a lot of different ways. So like, in a lot of systems, people want to separate out first name and last name for various reasons. And so you might have a separate first name and last name field. The problem with that is that that's a very Western European naming convention construct, and it doesn't work that way for everyone, and it doesn't work that way around the world. So like some people have multiple first names. Some people have multiple last names. In some cultures, the order is different, and they call them different things. And so, and in some other cases, like if people have hyphens in their name, a form will air out. Or if there's a character limit in names, like this used to happen to me back when I was in grade school, when we would fill out like our our standardized tests, which back then were on paper, but like I could not fit Elizabeth, like it would go to Elizabeth. And I couldn't, and I'd always raise my hand to the teacher and say, well, I can't fit my whole name on here. Am I going to get in trouble, or is my scores not going to be counted? And they're like, oh no, it's fine. Right. But like, so if you fail the experience on someone simply entering their name, you've already left them out.
Right. And in such a personal way too.
Yeah. Yeah. And then like beyond that, there's lots of examples around, whether it's having an accessible website, right? That sort of like a lot of companies say they're following, web accessibility guidelines, but in true reality, they're not. And the web accessibility guidelines are pretty old. Like the current standard that we're using in the US was written in 2014. There are a lot more things that we can be doing for people living with disabilities in technology that go beyond just what's like required on paper.
Absolutely. And I've actually seen a lot of conversations around accessibility as kind of a debated feature in a startup and how quickly they'll decide to focus on it. And I definitely understand both sides, where at a certain point when you're working on like the beta or version like 0.1 and you're just internally trying to figure something out, you might not have accessibility features in place. But it really is essential to include that as kind of a foundational step, even if it is a little extra work.
Yeah, for sure. And it's super important. Like the, one of the best examples of accessibility that like was done for a specific intention, but it positively impacts almost everyone's life, is the curb cuts that are in sidewalks when you're at an intersection. So those were originally created for wheelchairs. But they work for everyone. They work for people who have strollers, kids on bikes. They work for people who maybe have a temporary disability, like maybe you hurt your foot. Yeah, shopping carts, like, and that's something that's now so invisible in our society because they're so prominent and so common now. But that was like a real world accessibility tech innovation that now is just so invisible. And captioning is another thing, right? Like, if I'm watching anything on any of the streaming services, I always have captioning on. Part of the reason is I like to keep my TV low so I don't wake up my kids, right? But captioning was obviously originally created for people who have, either hearing loss or hearing disabilities. And so, but it's so great in so many contexts to be used by pretty much anyone who wants to use it.
Yeah, absolutely. So what do you think teams should try to keep in focus as they're building digital products that are inclusive? Are there things outside of including accessibility features as a main focus they could do to be more inclusive?
Yeah. So I think, the first thing a team should do is take a look at the current makeup of their current team and work to have more representative members of the people that they're hoping that they're building products for, right? Like, is our team diverse enough from people from different backgrounds and abilities? Just first of all. And like, that includes like, making a case for actually having like an accessibility engineer, on your projects, as well, or even, if that's not an option, working to get your team accessibility certified, because there's a lot of really great, certification programs out there that like your team can go through like a 10-hour course and learn just a ton of things, to at least, push the envelope further, in the understanding of what's even available or what should be done from an accessibility standpoint.
Yeah, and to help clarify for someone who might be interested in that, is that a national accessibility standard, or are there regional groups that they can go to for education on that?
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of different groups. Like right now, my team at CivicActions, we have a goal before the end of the year that we're going to take the Intro to Web Accessibility course through edX. It's a phenomenal course. Like I wouldn't claim to be like before this work an accessibility expert, but like I'm engaged in the topic and have attended conferences on accessibility, and the way that they have this training, it just does such a great job of, presenting different scenarios based on specific disabilities and personal preference on top of that. Like two people can have the same disability, but they have their own personal preferences. And so they might choose to interact with technology in different ways based on those things. And so it does a really good job of providing scenarios and examples and tools to help you in that work.
Yeah, so it's not necessarily one stringent set of if A, then B. There's a few different preferences and use case like context ideas that might go into decisions.
Yes.
So that sounds like something teams might need a few iterations to work through. That might not be a work on accessibility for version 1 and it's correct for version 5 option.
Right. Or like there's like maybe some intro stuff that you can start with as a good framework. Like the challenge with doing accessibility later is this going to actually end up costing you more money in the long run because you're going to build it wrong.
Okay.
And so like the standard thing is like, well, we don't want to do that right now because it's going to take more time and it's going to cost us more money. But that's like a short-term thinking. Most organizations, if they get to a point where they launch an MVP, and in fact, a lot of organizations don't act on accessibility until they get sued. And then it's so much work because usually what happens in those cases is it's not just like, oh, we need to make these 3 minor changes. It's like major overhauls to the experience because it was not built right to begin with.
Yeah, that's an idea that sounds really similar to technical debt as we describe it to our customers. And that's where if you table a feature that you're not talking about and you get down this road that you're not including that in the thought of building any of the structures, you might have to go and completely rebuild a database and how it's structured to include that later. If you need like a filter you don't have included. So that makes a lot of sense where if you table something and you have all of this structure and infrastructure built up and all these features, it's going to be a lot more work to go back down that rabbit hole because you might have to change 8 out of 10 of them to include these accessibility functions.
Right. Well, and if you go back to the curb cuts scenario too, right? Like now, like when sidewalks are redone, they're molded to be in that cut shape, but they're called curb cuts because when they first started doing them, they were cutting into the curb. So like they had to go back and grind, like either break that section of the curb out and rebuild it or go grind those curbs out.
Yeah, and you're paying for the demolition then as well, not only the new molding.
Yep. And all that time to do that in every city block, on every corner of every city block.
Yeah, that's a really good comparison out too to the technical debt idea where if you build out more and more cities while ignoring that, you're going to have to pay more and more crews to go in and demo, pay for more of their tools and all of that to correct that thing you've been ignoring.
Right. And then because it takes a long time for like someone, who needs that curb cut, like you might have a specific path that you need to navigate to somewhere, but maybe only the first 3 blocks have the cuts. And then you're stuck on the next block where you might need some help getting up that curb, or you have to go on the street till you get to the, like that's the same thing of like, if you build something and then you're like, well, here's this huge list of stuff we need to fix. You're iterating on accessibility and that's great. But because you're iterating on accessibility with something that's already live and published, you're like getting people to a point where like, oh yeah, this is great. And then they're hitting a roadblock again, that they can't navigate through easily.
Yeah, and that's something that does kind of damage their trust in your program too, I'm sure. To try to use it and get blocked completely by the technology is really disheartening.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it obviously is apparent that you do have a significant passion for these empathy tech focused projects, but even real world applications. How did you become interested in that from kind of the law corporate work transitioning to the startup and video game focus and now empathy focused tech projects? What bridged the gap there?
Yeah. So after so my video game startup failed. That's like a whole nother podcast.
Sure.
But, I did a couple stints at agencies. And then, I went to go work for, another startup, called Smart Things. They do smart home technology. And while I was there, we were acquired by Samsung. So that was my first time dabbling in product, work. And when I left Smart Things, I was at this point in this career where I was like, we were building cool things, and shaping the industry. I mean, we were acquired by Samsung, right? What came to me is like, there were huge barriers, in our work. So really cool tech, really important tech. We were seen as really important tech. But there was a barrier, a financial and a time barrier to setting up a smart home. There's like a lot of costs and there's a lot of personal time that you need to invest in it. And I was like, well, if we can do this really cool stuff here, like, why can't I just take all my skills and really help true inequities in society and technology?
Okay.
So that's what led me to Impact Tech.
Got it. So you saw the innovation that was happening at these bigger corporations and you wanted to be able to put kind of that personal compassion into it and apply it to people that you saw needing it.
Yep, you got it.
And initially, did that look like you applying that direct product knowledge from the Samsung world into tech, trying to go into people's homes and show them how they could use that to improve their lives? Or what were kind of your first steps into that empathy focus?
So I didn't do that at Smart Things. I left Smart Things to go find a company where I could do that.
Okay.
I left Smart Things and I took a work sabbatical for a while because I was trying to figure out. For a while, I was like, well, maybe I can go into the nonprofit world and do this. And I was like, no, most nonprofits are just too far removed from what tech is actually doing in terms of software development.
Yeah, I'm loving that this came up because I saw it in your kind of LinkedIn resume that you have there, that you took a work sabbatical, and it was in 2016, which I've heard of a lot of people doing with like the Great Recession or the Great Resignation and everything, and focusing and using this time or the last year or two as time to reassess their careers. But you did that on the forefront, and it looks like it was a really good experience for you.
Yeah, it's the greatest thing I've ever done in my career. Hands down.
Awesome. What gave you the confidence to do that? Was it just where you landed, you hit a breaking point, you knew you wanted change? Or was it a layoff round or something where you kind of got put in a situation and it was forced on you?
Yeah, no, it wasn't forced on me. I put in my 2 weeks and everyone was like, where are you going? And I was like, I'm going to go take naps on my couch.
Wow. That's awesome. Like self-respect.
No, but so we were working really long hours and thankfully I was part of an acquisition. So I had money from that. So I want to be really honest about there is a lot of privilege in being able to take a work sabbatical. I had enough money saved up so that I didn't need to worry about a job at all for a year.
Sure. Got it.
But for me, it was before I left, I tried to figure out if there was another way. Should I just take another role in this org? I also interviewed at a handful of places, but honestly, it felt like I was just running to something else to get me out of what I didn't want to be in at the moment. And I was like, I didn't feel like I was in a great place mentally because I didn't have the time to think through what I really wanted to do. And the sabbatical was the place where I was going to do that. One, I just needed to take a break. But then two, it was my ability to like recenter with myself and realign with what my values were and sort of map out what I wanted for myself and my career.
Yeah, and people talk about personal investment being key all the time. And I think looking at that as either time or money, both a lot of the time is key, because sometimes just time to focus on yourself, if you're being purposeful about it, can be worth so much more than just diving into another class course or going to another job and seeing what happens. So that's really commendable. That's awesome.
Oh, I was just going to say one thing. I call them micro retirements. I did another one more recently.
Sure.
And if I have the need to, I'll probably do more again in the future because they're so great.
Yeah, I know my brother took a little extended break when he was certain about transitioning roles into a slightly different job at a new company. And they just extended out that time where instead of immediately starting the job hunt or starting as you leave a position, they waited 3 months, 4 months, 1 quarter to just travel a little bit, enjoy things, work on side projects that they had wanted to, and then go back and dive into figuring out exactly what they needed. But you're right, that does come from a place of privilege, having enough to be able to sustain yourself through that time.
Yep.
But all of that currently landed you at CivicActions, which is a mission-based company helping government deliver better public services using modern technology. So government entities are able to work with people across different backgrounds and experiences. And how did your experience kind of bleed into inclusive tech into your role as the director of product at CivicActions?
Yeah. So if I roll back a few years, so the company that I landed at after my work sabbatical is I went to go work for a company called Software for Good.
Okay.
And how that all worked out was I approached their CEO at the time, Casey, and we just met up for coffee. And he was like, "Oh my gosh, I want to hire you. What can you do? Like, you for sure need to like talk to a few people on my team, and we'll see if it works." But like the next week, I had a job, and I got to pick the job that I wanted. And so what I did is I sold about half of their business. So I did biz dev, and then they weren't they had some like a small flavor of product in their work, but they weren't a product led organization. They were an engineering led organization, which makes sense. A lot of tech companies start that way. And so what I did is I would go out and sell the products that I wanted to work on. And that led to our biggest technology projects that we had. So like, we were working with nonprofits while I was there. We started working with government. We worked with the city of St. Paul, and we worked with the state of Minnesota on a COVID relief project. But like where sort of like all the Venn diagram really started to come together was I worked on a project with a nonprofit called Housing Link, and they wanted to take the waitlist process for project-based Section 8 housing. So like if you're looking for affordable housing and you will qualify for that program, you have to get on a wait list for housing. And it can take up to 7 years to get permanently placed somewhere. And the process historically has been all paper-based, and there's a whole bunch of inequities in the process. And it was going out and talking to people who were struggling with homelessness or really, really needed this, right? Because they didn't have a place to call their own. And everyone, it's a human right to be able to have your own roof over your head. Like it's super crucial to like everything that makes us whole people. And it
And a
was
consistent one, right?
right.
Because always uprooting and moving every year is just exhausting.
Yeah. And so it was through doing some of those interviews and then eventually getting to a point where we had like stuff prototyped. But anyways, long story short, we did some interviews. We did some prototyping work, and we went back to some of the people that we had interviewed originally. And I remember this one person that I had interviewed with, and the first interview was like really hard for me to hear because like I didn't know a ton about affordable housing before I worked on that project. And the interviews were so hard that like me and my coworker went and cried in our car afterwards to just like really get to see how these systems were just not serving people, even though that's what they were intended to do. And then knowing and then taking that as a catalyst to be like, well, we can fix this. We can fix this.
Okay, that's awesome.
Yeah. And so we went back once we had a prototype. We ended up creating 2 applications, one for potential renters that was very much like Airbnb, where you still have a preference, right, on where you want to live. Maybe you want to be on transit to get you to work, or you want to live in your kid's school district, or you have a certain amount of bedrooms that you want. Like, you still have preferences. So what Airbnb does for looking for a place to stay, and then what TurboTax does for taxes, this hand-holding experience to guide you through all the government muck that you have to fill out that you don't fully understand. And we were sitting in this discussion with this person, and we were showing them the prototype and getting their feedback on it. And they had a case manager that they work with to help sort of navigate program needs for them. And they turned to their case manager and they said, with this tool, I don't need you anymore.
Wow. Directly to the case manager, I'm sure their stomach dropped, but from an organizational standpoint, saving that many man hours across the board is insane.
Right.
And were you guys able to do this through grant money, through a venture capitalist that was really invested in this idea through just the CEO? Or on the front end of things, how did you guys put all that development time and resource into this idea to bring it to the government organizations?
Yeah. So our client partner was the big catalyst around that. So Housing Link is I would say a pretty well-funded nonprofit here locally in the Twin Cities. And they should be, because affordable housing is a very big need. And so they had acquired the funding for the project and went out and did that. And then we did everything that we could to help support and telling the story for the work. But they're the same client that we worked with that helped with we distributed $170 million in CARES relief funding to Minnesotans that needed mortgage, rent, and utilities relief. We actually took the affordable housing platform that we had and we ripped it apart, and we had the new application up for that program in 4 weeks. And then all funds were distributed in 4 months.
Okay, that's amazing. And that really does, I think, that's just so cool, because as I've started to work in full-time positions out of college longer, it is interesting where it becomes less about getting a steady paycheck and more about enjoying what you're doing and the cause behind what you're doing. And that's so exciting to see the change that you guys are directly making. I'm sure that was really fun to be a part of.
Yeah, it was really rewarding, especially we were also going through COVID. The whole world got to experience that, right? So to be able to do that. So that program positively impacted 75,000 Minnesotans.
Yeah, and that must have been such a whirlwind of policies and new options coming out for people, and trying to explain that to a huge number of people in need was probably overwhelming at the start.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know another passion project of yours, and kind of how I was introduced to you at Twin Cities Startup Week, is Amplify. And that's a monthly series that brings people together to amplify collective stories and experiences and help others live out their missions. how were you able to get involved with Amplify, and what do events look like for people that haven't been to one?
Yeah. So, the Amplify team, I actually knew everyone on that team. And mostly because of my role in impact work. I met all of them once I started working in impact tech. But I saw Dario, one of the co-founders, posted this event, and I was like, oh, I need to go to this. I need to go to this event. Like, I'm super passionate. Obviously, I've worked at startups, but I'm super passionate about entrepreneurship, and especially entrepreneurship for people who don't traditionally have a clear pathway to funding, right? So anyone who's like essentially not white male, it's really hard to raise money, and it shouldn't be. And so I was like, yeah, I want to get behind that. So I attended a session, and then I like instantly reached out to Mick, one of the other co-founders, and I was like, how can I help? How can I help?
That's Mick White, right?
Yep.
That's awesome. I was just actually at one of the best lunch ever events that he put on, and he's a really good guy to know.
He's fantastic. Yeah. And the interesting thing about Mick is like, I met Mick early in my Software for Good days, but we hadn't really stayed in touch. And so like, it was so good to reconnect. Like Mick embodies so much like living your values in a way that most people don't, that I just really appreciate and like frankly just want to be around.
He's also one of those people that is like a feast, not famine energy person, and he just wants to share the success he's found and the enjoyment he's found in that lifestyle. And it's really fun energy. I agree, because at the lunch, he's just so excited to connect people and enable them to grow what they're doing and their ideas however he can. It's really fun.
Yeah. Yeah. So more about Amplify. So we host monthly events on AirMeet. And the format of those events is, so they're 2 hours. We bring on a featured founder, so an entrepreneur who has a business that they're working on. We have a moderator, and so there's and then the way AirMeet works is like you join a table with like 8 other people. So you like pop onto AirMeet, and then you're like, okay, I'm going to go sit at this table. And so how the event works is it starts off like people meet at tables for a few minutes, and then we go to listening to the moderator, who's typically Dario, and our featured founder talk about like their entrepreneurship journey and about their organization that they're working, or their startup that they're working on. And then we break twice to go back to small groups to talk about like what we heard and how we think we can help amplify as individuals this founder. Like, could we become a customer? Could we help share stuff on LinkedIn? Do we know people who would want to be partners for this org? And I just love the format. And people feel so energized, and it's just a like really good feeling.
I love the consistency, because from the sounds of it, you break off back with the same tables, right?
You can move around, but it tends to be mostly the same tables, but we leave it free and open so that like, you know, if you want to go flow somewhere else and there's an open spot, that you can do that. We're not super rigid about it. We literally want it to feel like going to the best lunch ever and like connecting with people.
Yeah, I love that step beyond just the kind of moderator and focused individual discussion, because that was how it was at Startup Week, and it was still a really great discussion, but being able to have like focused breakout times to discuss around that, I could definitely see how that step up kind of elevates the ideas that come from that.
Yeah. And most people, when they go to events, like you're definitely going to get some great nuggets from like the event facilitator regardless, and the people on stage. But the best discussions always happen during the breaks, when you connect with someone and build off of that.
Yeah. And having some sort of way to gather that data from the audience and let them know they're contributing to the idea can make those conversations that might be between two people that are uninvolved and don't connect with the founder, and kind of bring those two together to gather all those little nuggets.
Yeah.
So I know CivicActions is currently hiring. If people are really interested in this kind of passion-focused tech or joining the team with you guys, how would they be able to get in touch and see if the role's right for them?
Yeah. I'd love to like riff a little bit more on CivicActions because I didn't get to talk about them a ton. But
yeah,
what,
let's do it now.
Awesome. What attracted me to CivicActions is if I think about impact, right? And what I want to do, where there's this theme of like, I want people to feel included, right? Like the me who didn't feel included back in high school when I was thinking about my profession.
Yeah.
Government work. So I work with the federal, we're contractors. I work with the federal government. So we're an agency for hire with the federal government. The federal government is like the creme de la creme of impact work with the sheer amount of people from backgrounds and abilities. Like there might be a handful of tech startups that have a bigger reach than that, but like here, like that's it, right? Like that's where you can make the biggest impact, in my opinion.
Absolutely.
And what's great about CivicActions is, first of all, we're 150 people throughout North America. So we have employees in the US and in Canada. The company has been fully remote since 2014.
That's awesome.
So
very forward thinking, even before COVID forced that on companies.
Yeah. And the company's been around since 2004, and they used to work in nonprofit work as well. So they've got that, but like, just like super, innovative people, super kind, caring people, and then like really smart as well. And so, like some of our main projects that we work on, and this is not all of them, but we work with a division of the federal government called WeCMS. They maintain a whole bunch of different websites, some of which you might be familiar with, like Medicare.gov or healthcare.gov.
Yeah.
And so we work on those. And then we also work with NSF, the National Science Foundation, and VA Veterans Affairs. And then we have like handfuls of other clients as well. But those are big ones.
Yeah, so you get to have hands directly on those really keystone resources that people use super frequently.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's really great. And we're, this role at CivicActions that I'm in is new. They more recently moved towards a matrix organization in the last couple of years. They used to be a really flat organization, and then their size was getting so big that the entire team was like, we would like to have more managers here.
Okay. That's not a frequent request, but
right?
It shows the growth.
Right. But, and we don't have a lot, like we don't have like middle management levels, but what they did, they were very intentional of, they created like so we had our executive team, and then they created these associate director roles and promoted a lot of people from within the org.
Awesome.
And then I was the first non-current CivicActions employee that was hired as a director. And our product, like we've done product practice over the years, but didn't have like a formally dedicated product team. And so I came on board to help grow that team, and sort of take like what I did for a much smaller company, Software for Good, and do it here with a larger company, just really growing their product practice area and ultimately growing our impact in our work that we're doing, and making technology that better serves all people, and frankly, making sure that like government technology doesn't suck, because most of it most of it does, right? Like most government tech is just not known for being a great experience. And so we're looking to, just make super inclusive, great user experiences that meet the needs of all people from all backgrounds and abilities.
Yeah, and I think that is a really cool angle to take on the progress that you can gain from technology, because a lot of people get a startup or a company that they're involved in. Not a lot of people, the very select few that have crazy successful tech organizations. But I'm sure a lot of that motivation and passion is behind driving those crazy profits or being able to affect a huge number of your network's lives and improve that. And you being able to take that acceleration from technology and apply it towards a government public entity that can do that to so many more people has to be rewarding on another level.
Yeah, it is. It's like, it's really exciting. I mean, like, if I'm going to work, right, if I'm going to make money for a living, I might as well be doing it something that's actually meaningful, right? Like that's my look at it. I need to be I should be making an impact if I'm doing this. Like, we only have one life. And unfortunately, we live in a world where we have to have money to like thrive in that life. And so if I'm going to take the time to spend 40 hours a week dedicating my life to something, it better be with purpose.
That's a lot of time of your life to be tolerating things, and living for weekends is tough. That's not a ton of time. You better have some vacation built up, because I think it's way more enjoyable to find something that is sustainable consistently, so work feels like a relief or a productive energy together, as opposed to a slog you have to go into every week.
Yeah.
Do you think that there are any specific role groups that you guys are hiring a lot in? Are you hiring for one position specifically, or is that still kind of morphing?
It's morphing. So like as with almost every single tech company right now, we're always hiring back-end engineers. Like sure. That's just a thing that like every single company needs. Beyond that, we've recently filled out our leadership team more. Like we recently hired a director of design, a director of front end as well. And we have our sights on growing more in the next 3 years. So, where I can see that happening, and like I've already, in addition to me joining, I already added another product manager to my team this year. Like, I would love to see the product team grow. I would love to see our design team grow. Obviously, as we come up with more ways to do technology, that then in turn means our engineering team will be growing. And then we have web accessibility engineers at CivicActions, but like I really want to see that sort of bloom and grow as well. But yeah, I think like as we expand, our client work, and what's really cool about our work is it's usually like multi-year contract stuff, because that's how the federal government operates. Like as soon as we know like we're going to win something, if we can't spin it up with available staff right now, that's when like a lot of our postings get sort of driven by of like, hey, we know there's new work that's coming. Now we're going to need to staff up.
So you guys have a little bit more of a consistent growth pattern than some tech firms that might have a little more of an ebb and flow where things go well, things go sideways. For you guys, it's a little more consistent and locked in bigger chunks.
Yeah, I would say there's a lot more stability than like a smaller agency that might work on like contracts that are a year or 6 months or less. There's a lot more stability in because they're multi-year. There's still risks there, right? Like we're working with the federal government. If the federal government decides to pass a bunch of laws and change, right, that could dramatically change our business model.
Yes.
But like, there's like, it's kind of interesting in the fact that like you're working for an agency, but it's just like a different vibe because there's not, from what I've seen, there's not this like worry about what, how much money we're going to have in 3 months because we have to secure other work.
Yeah. And that probably allows you guys to have a real focus on the job at hand rather than that third hat of, is our company going to stay afloat?
Yeah. Yep.
That's great. Are there any final thoughts about CivicActions you think a listener would want to know now?
Yeah. I have a grand vision for CivicActions and for all companies, I really, and I say like, this is usually like a follow-up statement to like, even the most well-intended software is oppressive and like that needs to change is, there is tremendous power in technology. And I think everyone got to see that when COVID happened. I mean, my mom knows how to use Zoom now. She's 76 years old. She knows how to use Zoom and she knows how to use Zoom really well.
That's impressive.
And I never thought that was going to be the case. Right. And so like technology is so crucial to society and our ability to thrive. That should not be taken lightly. There's a degree of in medicine, doctors have to take a Hippocratic oath, right? We should have something similar in tech where we're not doing harm when we're putting things out in the world and technology, because when, even our well-intended work oppresses someone or leaves someone out, it's usually the people who are already oppressed by every other system in society. So we're just piling on.
Right.
And that's messed up. And so it is our responsibility as technologists to not take our role lightly and to seriously consider the impact of all people and all abilities as we build our technology.
That's powerful. I think the idea behind the quietest voices being the quickest to kind of lose their perspective in the thought leadership conversation is one that can't be overlooked.
Yep, hear, hear.
Well, I appreciate you coming on to talk today, Liz, and I would like anybody that's really excited about what they're hearing today to be able to get in touch with you or in touch with CivicActions quickly. Are you the person for that? And how can they connect with you and CivicActions as well?
Oh gosh, yes. I love, as I mentioned earlier, I love meeting new people. I love new things. So and I'm happy to answer any questions anyone has. People can connect with me on LinkedIn. You can also email me, liz.tupper@civicactions.com. And then if I get too busy, I can always refer people over to our hiring team as well.
Awesome, Liz. Well, thank you so much for the time today. And it was great to learn more about the good causes you've been working towards.
Thanks, Michael. I really appreciate the invite, and this has been fun.
Thanks to Liz Tupper for joining the podcast today. You can connect with Liz on LinkedIn and find a link to her email in the show notes, which can be found at constantvariables.co. If you're heading to LinkedIn, be sure to also connect with our show host, Michael Roth. You can get in touch with any of us here at Constant Variables by sending an email to hello@constantvariables.co. Today's episode was produced by Jenny Karkowski and edited by the courageous Jordan Doust. This episode was brought to you by the Jed Mahonis Group. Check us out at jmg.mn and sign up for our monthly newsletter at jmg.mn/news.